Tomorrow is the Tzemach Tzedek's birthday. And the Rebbe said, Rabbi's machshov is belev ish. Batzas Hashem Yisakom, I wanted to teach a Maimon, and the Rebbe wants me to talk about the Tzemach Tzedek, so we'll talk about the Tzemach Tzedek. This year, the Tzemach Tzedek is going to turn 221. 221. He's going into his 222nd year. Now, B'Hashgacha Pratis, the last several Maimorim that we learned made mention of the fact that the Tzemach Tzedek's birthday is Erev Rosh HaShana. Remember with the Maimon we learned yesterday spoke about 200 years, and we had a different Maimon that also spoke about 200 years. So we'll talk about the Tzemach Tzedek. The Tzemach Tzedek is given the Malpanim Zan Einikol. Tzemach Tzedek was Alter Rebbe's grandson. He was his daughter's son, Rebbetzin Devorah Leah. For those who do not know, the Alter Rebbe's first two children were girls. And he very much wanted a son. And he was begging his Rebbe, the Mizitcher Magid, to give him a bracha for a son. And for many years, the Mizitcher Magid would not respond. The Mizitcher Magid would ignore him. Right before the Mizitcher Magid passed away, the Mizitcher Magid gave him a bracha for a son. But his two oldest children were daughters. His oldest, his Bechoida, was named Freide, or Freidke, as she was called by Chassidim. She was an incredible lady. She was the Alter Rebbe said about her that she had a neshama from Alma D'Tchura, which means she had a masculine soul. Now, I want to make a clarification. We all have feminine souls. Even the men amongst us have very feminine souls. A masculine soul means a mashpia. Mashpia is a Rebbe. Most neshamas are nekeva. A neshama v'alma d'chuda means that had she been a man, she would have been a Rebbe. And the Alter Rebbe said, in Mepnei Siba, she came down as a woman. Freidke. She was probably born in Chavdal de Chavhei. She was probably born in 1764 or 65. She passed away 6 months after her father, and she's buried together with him in the same oil. In other words, I don't think she lived 50 years. There's printed letters from her in Avoida and Chassidus to the Mittler Rebbe. She writes Mittler Rebbe, Bruder Tayere. It's very interesting. She was older. She was a very big Balas Madrig. She was a big Tzadekis. And a Go'oina. She was an incredible scholar. And the Alter Rebbe used to say Chassidus for her privately. And the Mittler Rebbe would stand by the door, and he wanted to listen in, and when the Alter Rebbe would catch him, he'd kick him out. And there's a story with the Gadol, that the Alter Rebbe said a Maimer on the Big Day Kahuna, and he skipped the Avnei, he skipped the Gadol. So in the middle of the Maimer, the Mittler Rebbe took off his Gadol and threw it at her. To let her know, excuse me, ask him about the Avnei. The second daughter was Devorah Leah. Devorah Leah was also a very big Mulumedes and a very big Chachoma. An incredible woman. An incredible woman. She gave away her life that the Alter Rebbe should live. Everybody knows the famous story. That the Alter Rebbe saw there was a kitrug on him in Tovkuf Nebeis, 1892. And he was very depressed about it. And in Elul, he confided in her, in his own daughter. He didn't confide in anybody. Only in his daughter. And she got 3 Hasidim to swear on a Sefer Torah they'll do whatever she says. And then she made him a bezdin to paskin that she would die, that her father would live. The Alter Rebbe was very bitter. Because the Alter Rebbe wanted Shaloya Yedechilov. The story was that he sent a pan to Reb Nachman Shenabelev. Reb Nachman Shenabelev sent back a message he could help the Alter Rebbe live Al Yedechilov, that somebody should die in his stead. So the Alter Rebbe responded, Shaloya Yedechilov habach ikent alein. That someone should die instead of me, I knew I could do that on my own. I didn't want anybody to die. I was hoping Reb Nachman Shenabelev would be able to help him. Shaloya Yedechilov. And she volunteered, Pashat. Right before she passed away, she asked Alter Rebbe to take care of her son, her Mendel. And Alter Rebbe did. The Tzemach Tzedek was raised by the Alter Rebbe. Initially, the Alter Rebbe had his little bed. He wasn't in a crib anymore, but he was in a little bed in his office, where the Alter Rebbe learned and davened. And of course, there's the famous description of the Alter Rebbe davening, and Tzemach Tzedek had his potato film that he would put on, and he would take them off, and he would grind them, and they would get caught between the legs of the chairs, and he would get all frustrated, and Alter Rebbe would bend down in the middle of putting on the film to release the strings of that Tzemach Tzedek's potato film. And the Chassidim who were looking through the cracks in the door would say, the Alter Rebbe is not bending down just because he's his grandson, but this is a Psanan de Zach, it's the Tzemach Tzedek. One of those incredible stories is that the story was like this. The Alter Rebbe's Chassidim were fanatics. They drilled holes in the Alter Rebbe's door so that they could see what he was doing. So Alter Rebbe put a curtain on the inside of the door, so that even though there were holes, he couldn't see. So the Chassidim used to hope that the curtain was open, and sometimes the curtain was open. If the curtain was open, you could see. So the story was that the Alter Rebbe said a maimed, and the Chassidim did not understand it fully. And as was the tradition, they came to the Alter Rebbe and told the Rebbe they didn't understand it, and the Alter Rebbe agreed to chazar the maimed, to say the maimed again, on several conditions. And one of the conditions was that it would be after davening. Another condition was that only Elter Chassidim would come in and not Younger, only the senior Chassidim. So they stood by the door and they looked through the holes, and the curtain was open, and they watched Alter Rebbe daven. And they watched the Tzemach Tzedek. Alter Rebbe put on 4 pieces of film, so he kept on taking on and putting off, putting on, taking off. So the Tzemach Tzedek would put on his potatoes, take off his potatoes. The Rebbe left out of the room, he was before Upshanis. And eventually his strings got caught in the legs of the chair, and Alter Rebbe, in the middle of changing his film, bent down to release the string. The Tzemach Tzedek continued running around with his potato film. Then Alter Rebbe opened the door, and the Chassidim came in. When the Chassidim came in, a young Chassid stood by the door. He didn't come in because Alter Rebbe had given instructions. As Nor the Elter is on the Rhein, only the older Chassidim. His name was Reb Isaac Homler, who would later to be one of the great giants of Chassidus, a very big Gaon and a very big Chassid. And the Alter Rebbe said, "Wer steht beim Tier?" Who was standing by the door? So they told him, "Epis einer a younger man, a young man." And the Alter Rebbe said, "For younger light, wer alter light soll rein." Young people eventually will become older people, he can come in. So he stood in the back. Alter Rebbe started saying a maimed. I think it's Ashleisha Dvarim Ha'ela maimed. And as soon as Alter Rebbe starts saying the maimed, the little boy with his strings and his potatoes all over the place starts pushing his way through the legs of the Chassidim towards the front. And it looked like he was paying attention. He was intent. He was trying to hear. And the Rabbi Isaac Holmer says, "There's no way this boy is listening." He was 2.5. There's no way. As soon as he thinks that's thought, he suddenly hears Alter Rebbe stop the maimed and says, hört, wirst noch wissen, as hört. He's listening. You'll know that he's listening. 35 years later, the Tzemach Tzedek had to become a Rebbe. Now, the Tzemach Tzedek becoming a Rebbe is a story he didn't want. Mittler Rebbe passed away Tes Kislev in November 1827. The Tzemach Tzedek was on Makabel Denesius officially till Shavuos that year. 6 months later, which is whatever it is, May 1828. And the evidence it says in some places that the full Nesius of the Tzemach Tzedek didn't start till Shavuos Tzadik Aleph, which was 3.5 years later. Now Rabbi Isaac Homer was from the giants of Chassidus. He was the Matner Rebbe Chassid, the Middle Rebbe Chassid, and now he became a Chassid at Tzemach Tzedek, a Rebbe whom he was older than maybe by 15 or 20 years. So obviously it was a very big deal. Rabbi Isaac Homer came special to Lubavitch for that Shavuos, to hope to impress on the Rebbe the Tzemach Tzedek to be Makabel Denesius. A whole group of Elter Chassidim came Yamalt, Reb Peretz. I even think that Nechemia Dubrovnik came, Rebbetzin Isaac of Vitebsk. Some of the great senior Chassidim came that Shavuos to be by the Rebbe. And one of the Chassidim talked to the Rebbe, becoming a Rebbe based on the Maimeh Chazal, Ish Mazriya Tchila Yeledes Nekeva, Isha Mazras Tchila Yeledes Zocha, which means when a man is Mazriya first, he has a daughter, and when a woman is Mazriya first, she has a son. So they told him that he's the Alter Rebbe's daughter's son. Ish Mazriya Tchila, this is your mother. Isha Mazras Tchila, this is you. And the Tzemach Tzedek actually had a dream where he saw the Alter Rebbe, and the Alter Rebbe told him, it's in Hayem Yem. Ish Mazriya Tchila Yeledes Nekeva, das is their mama. Mama, Isha Mazras Tchila Yeledes Zocha, das bist du. And the Tzemach Tzedek said, mit der Maimeh Chazal spielt man sich nicht. You don't play around Maimeh Chazal, and he agreed. But die Betten sollen nicht mattern. People shouldn't make him work too hard because he wants to learn. And they mattered him plenty, and he learned plenty too. But the Tzemach Tzedek heard that Isaac Homler was ill. He wasn't feeling it. Isaac Homler then was probably 50. He lived another 25 years, Kemat. But he was not a young man. and he probably traveled a great distance. So the Tzemach Tzedek, the first thing Tzemach Tzedek did after he agreed to be a Rebbe was go visit to be Mevakar Chayla, Rabbi Ezel. Tzemach Tzedek was 37, 38, 37. And Rabbi Ezel was probably, was 55 or 60, something like that. So he came into Rabbi Ezel, and Rabbi Ezel, of course, heard that the Rebbe was Makabel in Nesiyas, which elated him, it made him very happy. And the Tzemach Tzedek said to Rabbi Ezel what the Gemara says. You have in the Gemara, there's two stories where they asked a person who was sick, Ahana alecha yisurim, are you happy about your suffering? And he says, Loi mehem v'loi mischarim, I don't want the suffering, I don't want the reward for the suffering. So he tells them, Pshoitli yodach, give me your hand. So the Tzemach Tzedek took Rabbi Ezel hand and he yanked him, he pulled him up, and he was healthy, he finished. And Rabbi Ezel came to the Maimed. So the Erev Shavuos, the Tzemach Tzedek said a Maimed. What Maimed did he say? How shall I should follow the Maimed? But now Rabbi Ezel was in the front. Maybe he even was standing behind the Rebbe. He says, this is impossible. I heard this mind from the Alter Rebbe when he was 2.5. And he thinks to himself, is it possible that he remembers the Maimed from then? And the Tzemach Tzedek stops. Feh. A young man soll mecheshi sein auf Kunsten. Which means, feh, a young man should accuse me of doing tricks. The Tzemach Tzedek used to call miracles Kunsten. He was margish as machshava. Feh. A junger Mann soll mecheshi sein auf Kunsten. Aber der Seid ist bei mir gewesen. Was soll ich tun? Der Seid ist mir gewesen, hat mir geheißen, sagen in der Maimer. My grandfather came to me and told me I should say this Maimer. So the Rabbi Zekom, 35 years later, got confirmation. He says, the Alter Rebbe, Yemot Bavoret. The Alter Rebbe allowed a young man to come into a room that 35 years later there'll be part of Nevuah. So this is clear that the Alter Rebbe intended that the Rebbe, the Tzemach Tzedek, should be Ramal Makemi. One of the interesting stories about Alter Rebbe, the Tzemach Tzedek, is as follows. The Alter Rebbe raised the Tzemach Tzedek, and they were very, very close. But there's a story that in the Alter Rebbe's own words revealed to the Alter Rebbe who the Rebbe the Tzemach Tzedek was. And this is the story. It was Samach Vova, Samach Zayin. You're talking now 1806, 1807. The Alter Rebbe called his granddaughter. The Tzemach Tzedek was married to her first cousin, Mittel Rebbe's Tochter. Her name was Chaya Mushka. She is listed as the fourth of the Mittel Rebbe's children. But it's pretty difficult to figure out how she could have been the fourth. But okay. She was the Mittel Rebbe's wife, Mittel Rebbe's Rebbetzin, was apparently a very, very, very strong character. The Mittel Rebbe's daughters were very outspoken. They were very chassidish. They were very tzniistic. They were very holy. But they were very, very strong characters. They were incredibly powerful personalities. And they said what was on their mind. When Menucha Rachel was going to Eretz Yisrael, so a group of Hasidim came to see her off, and she was so upset. She says, "Well, the Tata at Faraich sich meisen nefesh gewesen. What my father gave of himself to you, and this is how you honor his daughter." She wasn't happy with the way they came to see her off, and she said exactly what was on her mind. They were very famously outspoken women. Anyway, the Rebbe Chaim Mushka was also a very strong character, and Alter Rebbe calls her. It was Shavuos time. It was May 1806, 1807. And said to her, your husband probably has Chiddushei Torah. Bring me some of his Chiddushei Torah and don't tell him. She was 16 years old, 17 years old. Maybe she was 18. Tzemach Tzedek was 16. She could have been a year older, 2 years older. But her father at that point was Hachakel, 32 or 33 years old. Mittel Rebbe. Anyway, so she went. And she had notebooks and notebooks and notebooks of Torah. And she found one, what looked like a very hefty, a very packed, a very full notebook of Chiddushei Torah. And she brought it to the Alter Rebbe. It was the Madura Kama, it was the first draft of the Tzemach Tzedek's essay called Shadish Mitzvah Tefillah. Tzemach Tzedek wrote an essay on davening, very long. It's published, the second version is published in the Torah, in the Yechmet Tefillah, in the back. Alter Rebbe read it, and he was very excited. He gave it back to her, she put it back, and so on. She was so excited. And Alter Rebbe was so excited because he felt that now he knows who his grandson is. So he called in three Hasidim, and he said to them, I just read the Chiddushei Torah of my grandson, and I realized that I have 3 generations, a father, a son, and a grandson, and the Gemara says, Leiba Meheda Yinatik. When he says, what's Lashon HaPasuk? Mipicho, Pizaracho, Pizera Zaracho, Omar Hashem Yatav Adelam. If the Teda lasts in a family for 3 generations, Leiba Meheda Yinatik, it won't be easily uprooted. Chutam Meshulas, and he made a Shechiyanu. He called them these 3 Hasidim. He told them about the Tzemach Tzedek's greatness and learning, and he made a Shechiyanu. This was Tevis. This was the January. Tzemach Tzedek heard about it, and he was very upset. And he came to his wife with a complaint that she was disloyal. Haytachn. The first obligation of a woman is to her husband. How did she do this without her permission? His permission. So she says to him, but the Zayda asked. So he says, so, Api Allah, you have to honor me first. So she says, but he's your Zayda also, and you have to honor him as well. And he says, so, you have to have my permission. And he moved out of the house. And he was seriously contemplating divorce. And apparently he already had a child. Rebbetzin Chaimushka was a very strong lady, but she couldn't take this. She just fell apart. This was too much for her. And she went and told her father. In other words, they didn't keep it between them, she told her father. In the middle of the Rebbe, the Shved, the father-in-law, came to the son of the father, he moved out, a young girl with a baby because he gave ksavim. What did he do? He bankrupted you, he spent a lot of money on the credit card. What did she do? And he says, Api Allah, she has to honor me first, she didn't have the right to do it, and I want to think about it, and until I resolve it, we're not going to be living together. And the middle Rebbe tried to reason with his son-in-law, and there was nobody home. He was also Schneerson. So he went and he told the Alter Rebbe, the grandfather. And the Alter Rebbe called the Rebbe the Tzemach Tzedek. And he said to him, I understand that you have a shaila in halacha that you need to clarify. But since you're partial, you're in a geya b'davar, it involves you emotionally, let me help you. Let me help you paskin the shaila. And the Tzemach Tzedek, of course, allowed the Alter Rebbe, and naturally the Alter Rebbe encouraged him to forgive her and that they should live together, Eishes Nurim, and so forth. And the Tzemach Tzedek acquiesced. But the Alter Rebbe made a comment then, and he made a comment with a lot of pain. He quoted the pasuk that indicated, in effect, a premature death. In that pasuk, there's a word, Neid b'yem nachla, Neid is 54. The Rebbetzin Chaimushka passed away exactly 54 years later. Shabbat Shmos, same time, mamish, not just the same year, but the same week. And by her Levaya, the Tzemach Tzedek said, now I understand what my grandfather meant 50 years before when he made that comment. And the Hamsh Chasiba was, the Alter Rebbe said to Tzemach Tzedek, since you have a tina, you're disappointed, I'm going to be appeasing you. How am I going to appease you? I'm going to appease you by making a shia to learn with you. And Alter Rebbe made a kviyas, learn with the Tzemach Tzedek 3 times a week. And he would chaz him the Maimorei Chasidus that he said before the Tzemach Tzedek was old enough, and before Tzemach Tzedek was born. He also chaz Teidas that he heard from the Magin and from the Baal Shem Tov. Tzemach Tzedek got a very, very good deal out of this. 5 months later, Shavuos, the word got out. But the story happened in the beginning of Tevis. Shavuos is Sivan. Yeah, it's a Ma'aseh from Finav Sech Chadoshim. Chasidim heard that Alter Rebbe said Shechiyonu on the Tzemach Tzedek's Torah. And all of a sudden, they started to give him covered. So Tzemach Tzedek walked in the room, people would stand up. There was a Fabrengen, Tzemach Tzedek was sitting, nobody would speak. And the Tzemach Tzedek was, in effect, forced onto a pedestal. It was forced to be mizakt above. 50 years later, 50 years later, it was Erev Shavuos, Tafresh Yud Zayin, approximately, either 1856 or 1857. It was 50 years to the day after this story had become public. The Rebbe, the Tzemach Tzedek, was now in his mid-60s, an incredibly successful Rebbe, with hundreds of thousands of Hasidim, and a voluminous contribution to the literature of Teresh Baal Peh, which is historic. The Rebbe Marash walks into his father and he finds him crying. The Rebbe Marash was the youngest of the Tzemach Tzedek's children, but he was the one who was involved in all the Askaras. He would travel for the Tzemach Tzedek for matters of public affairs, for community inyan. So he sees his father crying. He says to his father, "Vasad denayek zed." What new decree did the government of Russia make that's anti-Semitic? So the Tzemach Tzedek said, "There's no new gzeda. So the Rebbe Marash says, Tate Eba Zei, was weinst du? So why are you crying? So the Tzemach Tzedek tells him, es ist schon 50 Jahre, so ich nur letzte Mal gesessen bei Chassidische Verbringen. He says, it's 50 years since the last time I was by Chassidische Verbringen. And the Rebbe Marash says, what? You had Verbringen Shabbos? You had Verbringen last week, last month, you just put him. What do you mean 50 years? So Tzemach Tzedek tells him the mais. And Tzemach Tzedek says, when you go to Chassidische Verbringen, you want to be a fly on the wall. You want to be like everybody else. They start giving you covetous and this. It's nice. He says, 50, can you imagine? And the Frierdiker says, stell sich vor how great the Tzemach Tzedek was. And how fantastically accomplished he was. And nevertheless, he cried that because, so to speak, he was prematurely exposed, he was deprived of the possibility of sitting with other Hasidim, like an einfacher Chassid, like a Chassid min Ashura, like a regular Chassid, and you jab him and he jabs you back, and both people love each other. You understand? Another episode which is quite interesting, and there's two stories. And I think it happened twice. But when the Rebbe, the Tzemach Tzedek, was 2.5, his mother was still alive. So you had the Maise with the Shavuos. Shavuos Tovkuf Nun Beis, 1792, I'm sorry. The Alter Rebbe was very bitter. Everybody saw that the Alter Rebbe was very upset. And the bitterness was so consuming, you could not snap him out of it. You couldn't get him to relax. The Alter Rebbe was very, very upset. Because the Alter Rebbe saw it Tutzach L'mayla. Shavuos Bam Tish, the Alter Rebbe was sitting, sehr verbittert, very bitter. And at a certain point, he sat up very, very straight. Respectful. The Hasidim knew that when the Alter Rebbe sits up straight, that's a siman that his Rabbeim, that means to say the Baal Shem Tov and the Maggid had entered the room. They had already passed away. They would come to the Fabrein. And you could tell from the Alter Rebbe's mood that the Rabbeim had come. Sitting up, and he's very fadveket, very upset. Suddenly he stands up, and he makes this incredibly emotional charge. He says, Zayde, Rebbe, Zayde, the Baal Shem Tov is called Zayde. Rebbe's Chassidus is in a sakana, and you have to make it Achim Rabbim. He finishes this incredibly emotional plea, and he falls to the ground like a thud, like a stone, like a sack of earth in a dead faint, and became a big tumult. Call a doctor, get water. The Tzemach Tzedek was a 2.5-year-old boy, 2 years and 8 months, approximately. He was in the house, he sees a commotion, so he pushes his way through the legs. He gets to the front, and he sees that the Zayde Chalash, so he starts to scream, Zayde, 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 and he runs over to Alter Rebbe, who was laying on the floor, face up, and he grabs Alter Rebbe's hand, and he's trying to pick him up. He was 2 years old. And Alter Rebbe opens his eyes. And Alter Rebbe sees his grandson. And he allows the little boy to pick him up, you understand? And Alter Rebbe tazagitan ze yנחמנו. This is our nachama. This is our consolation. Ze yנחמנו. Many years later, there was a similar episode. One of the great Hasidim was a chassid by the name of Reb Yנחmenu Devorah Leah. Nehemiah's father, his name Avram Birch. Avram Birch was considered a malach from Alter Rebbe's greatest Hasidim. Reb Yנחmenu Devorah Leah himself was a Go'anim, a very, very big Go'an. This Shal Teshuvas Divrei Nehemiah was a very, very big Talmud Chacham. He was a businessman. He never held a position as a Rav. He had been at Tzemach Tzedek's Chavrusa. They learned together. B'chayif in the middle of Rebbe days to write the Teshuvas. When the middle Rebbe passed away, Reb Ynachmenu Devorah Leah did not go to Levaya to Tzemach Tzedek. It was his Chavrusa. Tzaddik Gimel. Tzaddik Gimel means around 5 years after Tzemach Tzedek becomes a Rebbe, Reb Ynachmenu Devorah Leah has a dream. And in his dream, he sees the Alter Rebbe. And the Alter Rebbe says to him, Farvos hast du nicht kein Rebbe? Why don't you have a Rebbe? So the Ynachmenu Devorah Leah tells Alter Rebbe, because I don't have one. I can't invent one. So Alter Rebbe tells him, Forum Lubavitch de Hosta Rebbe. Go to Lubavitch, you have a Rebbe. And then he added cryptic words. Menachem behoive, Menachem be'asib. Which means Menachem now, Menachem in the future. This is really one of the most earliest explicit Ramazim to our Rebbe, to the Rebbe's Zakir. Menachem behoive, Menachem now, Menachem be'asib, Menachem in the future. And the Chaim Rebbe in front of Lubavitch. The Tzemach Tzedek's Rabbistra was incredibly successful. But the Tzemach Tzedek's Rabbistra was marked by incredible tsaras. There was problems. First, there was the Gezerah of Tchum HaMoshav. The borders where Jews were allowed to live. They couldn't live here, they couldn't live there, they lost all of their business. Then there was the Gezerah of the Kantonisten. Remember that? They would take Yiddish Kinderlach for 25 years of slave labor. And then there was the Reform, the Haskalah. And the Tzemach Tzedek, it was a very difficult time. But at the same time, it was a very rich time. The Giluim of Hasidus, Tzemach Tzedek, and the Fanem, the greatness of his court was extraordinary. It was very, very, very big. I mean, the rumor is that he was the Rebbe over all of Russia. It's a true statement to say that the Rebbe with the most Hasidim was the Tzemach Tzedek. I mean, we all believe the Rebbe is the Rebbe over every Jew and Mahavd, every Goy on the planet. But the Pashas, Begolei, Tzemach Tzedek had 1 million Hasidim. All the Yidden in Russia was Hasidim. A very successful Rebbe. But it was also a Rebbe marked by considerable tzaddas. In fact, there were many customs, many traditions, which Hasidim had from earlier times that Tzemach Tzedek abolished. And he said that the reason he's abolishing these customs is because they're too pretentious, they're too showy, they're too demonstrative, and he didn't want to undermine, he didn't want to intimidate, he didn't want to antagonize the government that was watching him with 1,000 eyes. So he cut back on certain Fashidim forms of Hasidus. The Tzemach Tzedek cut back, he diminished. But it was an incredibly successful Hasidus. It was a very successful Hasidus. And one of the stories is that the Reform sent a spy to Lubavitch. And the spy was in Lubavitch for approximately 6 months or something like that. He came to every Fabring, he came to every Maimik, he came to every davening, and he hung around, and he Fabrenged, and he said L'chaim, and he did the whole program. And as the Frierdiker Rebbe describes it, he once went to the police station, and he came into the police station and says, I must eat some chazan. I can't stand this kosher food anymore. It's just mishkin kosher. And he had the pretense of being a rabbi with a big beard and pace with the ganzen amaises. When he left Lubavitch, he wrote up an essay, he wrote up a report on the Tzemach Tzedek. And when he wrote this, the Tzemach Tzedek is a very, very big Talmid Chacham. He's very, very, very well respected, but he's a very, very big battler. He has no idea what's going on in the world. He just knows the books. If you're careful not to bother him, we could run circles around him. If you don't chepe him, you don't give him reason to react, he's so naive, you can do anything with him. So the Rebbe told the story once to Geshem Ber Jacobson, and he says that while this Apokadis was writing these words, the Rebbe, the Tzemach Tzedek, was sending out spies and running circles around him. Mm-hmm. And the Rebbe concluded, Nisht val mezet nish is a simin amatut nisht. When you don't see that the Rebbe is doing something, doesn't mean there's nothing going on. It means that you don't see it. This is the Tzemach Tzedek's Nesiyas. Tzemach Tzedek's Nesiyas. Okay. So I'll see you next year. Mitzvah Shem HaKsiv Chasim HaTev Shon HaTev Mesukah Azisa Yosh.
Are you going to teach next week between Rosh HaShana and Yom Kippur?
That's the plan. Yeah.